Oh my goodness. I say, you might not. Tatum, no. There we go. Shh. He was perfectly centered for that. Anyway, welcome everybody to the loin stream. We are a little bit nutty. We are a little bit Russian. We are a little bit. The devil is in the house. Our name is Ivan Nikolaevich. I mean, the entire cast of this Bukovic. We are a poet hired by Mikhail Berlois to write anti-Jesus poems for Litmag. Hashtag rare slam poetry. Hashtag rare poetry, I should say. We met Mikhail at the pond, got anti-Jesus lecture because our poem was bad. Hashtag slam poetry. Discussed Jesus isn't real when weird German with a Georgian accent shows up. Hashtag don't trust foreigners. Foreigner speaks perfect Russian, but also is probably a spy. Also has a dead black and green eye. Hashtag heterochromia main character. Can't prove Jesus wasn't real. Hashtag checkmate atheists. We don't know the German's name. Hashtag Veris das. The German predicted Mikhail's death, and it did happen, just as he said. Hashtag Berlois lost his head. Hashtag schizophrenia as predicted. We chase the weirdo German through Moscow, see that he has a weirdo checkered friend, and also a standing smart cat. Hashtag what the frick? Hashtag how do I get one? We jump in a very cold river and come back out and our clothing is gone. Hashtag pantsless in Moscow. Assume that the professor is also a setup, probably a foreign spy. Hashtag again, don't trust foreigners. Rush to the writers club with a fancy food in base floor. Hashtag late for the meeting. Hashtag yum yum. Finally get there and talk about what we saw. Hashtag people think we're nuts. This pirate guy at the club gets us committed. Hashtag pirates are against us too. Hashtag we just want to write poems. Hashtag pirate beaver stare alliance. Getting taken away to crazy town. At least it's good for inspiration. Hashtag at least I'll write a memoir. We are still at the hospital. Showdown with some pretty reasonable doctor. Hashtag not getting out. Going crazy. We're trying to write a report for police and can't stop sounding crazy. Hashtag pilot is love. Pilot is life. Hey, Vanya! Good to see you. So you're not working tonight? Meanwhile, all nuttiness is happening with the theater. The apartment number 50 is cursed and people keep disappearing and or are dying. Hashtag don't move in the neighbors. Oh, you good. I always am late for similar reasons. Mr. Masterman is doing black magic at the theater show. Hashtag be our guest. Hashtag new dresses for all. Stage Masterman has his head cut off and put back on for being annoying. Hashtag a lifetime of trauma. Hey, you changed your schedule? Nice. That means you can do all sorts of chaos on a Friday night. Everyone loses their mind at money gifts. Hashtag keep your head on the swivel. Hashtag magic money. Dude was thrown into Yalta. Hashtag we need to find him. Hashtag trust me, we will. Dude was punched in bathroom and taken away. Hashtag seat up, beat up. Man thrown into jail, tricked by demons. Hashtag the devil knows. Writer friend in asylum comes and talks to us about pilot mania and being laughed at for story. Hashtag writer elites hate Jesus. For real though, we talked to this guy and he believes us about Pilate and tells us that we met the devil. Hashtag we aren't crazy after all. Are you margaritaing tonight? Writer friend called the master talks about cheating which girl that he loved at first sight and she never came back. Hashtag writing a story though. Hashtag Hat with a yellow M, hashtag Master and Margarita. Vampires appear to financial director in his office, coming to nibble on his dribble, if you know what I mean. Boo. Well, I hope getting to work early makes the day better. But they don't get their chance. Hashtag saved by the morning cock. Hashtag a doodle doo. And then we dream about theater harassment for foreign currency. We got no money at all, bruh, but for real. We did have money. Hashtag founding fathers in the walls. Our walls, in fact. And everyone is still nutty. That is... that is the gist of it. Any questions? Okay. I can't help if he wanders over there. I tried. Hi, baby. An upsetting day. On Friday morning, that is, the day after the accursed performance, the entire staff of Variety Theater, the bookkeeper Vasily Stepanovich Lastokhin, 2 clerks, 3 typists, both cashiers, a messenger boys, ushers, and cleaning women. In short, everyone at the theater were not at their posts. Instead, they were all sitting on the sills of the windows at... I just cut your mouse. Come here, little one. We're sitting in the windows above Sadyova Street, looking down at what was happening outside of the theater. Stretched along the walls in a double line that reached as far as Kudrinsky Square were thousands of people. At the front of the line stood 20 or more of the most prominent scalpers in Moscow's theatrical world. The people in line were very agitated and kept attracting the attention of passers-by with their inflammatory stories of the previous day's extraordinary performance of black magic. These stories had particularly distressed the bookkeeper, Vasily Stepanovich, who had not attended the performance. The ushers were saying all sorts of preposterous things, for example, that after the performance some ladies ran down the street indecently clad, and other things of that sort. The modest and quiet Vasily Stepanovich merely blinked his eyes as he listened to all of the wondrous tales. He had no idea what he should do, even though something did have to be done, and by him in particular, since he was now first in command of the Variety Theater. By 10 in the morning, the line for the ticket seekers had swelled to such proportions that the police had gotten wind of it. Mounted and on foot, they descended, and the scene was astonishing speed, and managed to restore some order. However, even in the orderly line, a mile long, was a source of a distraction and amazement for the people on Sadovaya Street. That was the situation outside the theater, and inside, things weren't going very well either. The phones in the office of Likodeev, Rimsky, and Verenuka, as well as those in the ticket office and the bookkeeping department, had been ringing nonstop since early morning. At first, Vasily Stepanovich had made some sort of response to the callers, as had the cashier and the ushers, who mumbled something into the phone. But after a while, they stopped answering altogether, because they had absolutely no answer to give to the questions about the whereabouts of Likodeev, Verenuka, or Rimsky. At first, they had tried... What's the capital of Ecuador? I couldn't tell you the capital of Ecuador. That sounds like a question for internet searching. What do you need the capital of Ecuador for? Has it warmed up? That's the true question. I heard that it was supposed to be cold the first week of February, but it's like 70 degrees here. Any question and you said it. Yeah, I know. I know what that was in response to. I don't have an answer for that question. I felt the need to answer it though, because I did query for any questions. At first, they had tried to get off with the lines like, Likodeev is in his apartment, but this only made the callers say that they had called there and been told that he was at Variety. An agitated lady had called demanding to speak with Rimsky after she had been advised to call his wife. The receiver burst into tears, saying that she was the wife and that Rimsky was nowhere to be found. It was the beginning of a kind of nonsensical farce. The cleaning woman was already told everyone that when she came to clean the financial director's office, she found the door wide open, the lights on, the windows overlooking the garden smashed, the chair overturned on the floor, and no one there. Just after 10, Madame Rimsky charged into Variety, wringing her hands and sobbing. Vasily Stepanovich was totally at a loss and had no idea what to advise her. Then, at 10:30, the police showed up. Their first completely reasonable question was, "What's going on here, citizens? What's this all about?" The theater staff pushed a pale and flustered Vasily Stepanovich forward and then stepped back. He had no choice but to call a spade and to admit that the administration of the Variety Theater, to wit, the director, financial director, and manager, had vanished and their whereabouts were unknown. That after last night's performance, the MC had been removed to a psychiatric hospital, and that, briefly put, last night's show had been nothing short of scandalous. After consoling the sobbing Madame Rimsky as much as they could and sending her home, they seemed most interested in the cleaning woman's account of the state of the financial director's office. The staff was asked to get back to work, and a short time later an investigative unit arrived, accompanied by a muscular dog of the color of a cigarette ash, with highly intelligent eyes and pointed ears. The theater staff was immediately abuzz with the rumor that the dog was none other than the famous Ace of Diamonds, and it was, in fact, he. His behavior astounded everyone. As soon as Ace of Diamonds ran into the financial director's office, he started to growl and bared his monstrous yellow fangs. Then he laid down on his belly, his expression a blend of anguish and fury, and started to crawl over to the broken window. Having overcome his fear, he suddenly jumped up on the windowsill, stuck his pointed muzzle up into the air, and let out a wild and vicious howl. Not wanting to come down from the window, he growled and trembled and tried to jump out. The dog was led out of the office and let go in the lobby, and from there he went out to the front entrance and into the streets, leading those who were following him over to the taxi stand. Then he lost the scent. After that, Ace of Diamonds was taken away. The investigative unit settled into Veronuka's office and began summoning one by one all of the members of the Variety staff who had witnessed everything that had gone on at yesterday's performance. It must be said that the investigators encountered unforeseen difficulties at every step of the way. The thread kept breaking in their hands. Had there been any posters? Yes, there had, but during the night they had been pasted over with the new ones, and now, for the life of them, they could not find a single one. And where had the magician come from? Who knows? Wouldn't there have been a contract? One would assume so, replied distraughtly Vasily Stepanovich. And if there had been a contract, would it have gone through bookkeeping? Absolutely, answered Vasily Stepanovich in distress. So where is it? It's not here, replied the bookkeeper, growing paler by the minute and spreading his hands helplessly. Indeed, there was no trace of any contract, not in bookkeeping's files, nor in these financial directors, Likodeev or Veronuka. And what was the magician's name? Vasily Stepanovich didn't know. He hadn't been at the show. The ushers didn't know. The ticket office cashier wrinkled her brow and thought and finally said, Woland, I think. Grumble! And are you sure that it was Woland? Well, maybe not. Maybe it was Folland. The Bureau of Foreigners had never heard of any magician named Woland or Folland. Karpov, the messenger boy, reported that he thought that the magician had been staying at Likodeyev's apartment. Naturally, they went there right away, and no magician was to be found, nor was Likodeyev. Grunya, the maid, wasn't there either, and no one knew where she had gone. Missing, too, was the chairman of the House Committee, Nikanor Ivanovic, and Proleznyov. Something utterly unimaginable had occurred. The entire administrative staff of the theater had disappeared. A strange and scandalous performance had taken place yesterday, and who had staged it and at whose instigation was not known. And meanwhile, it was getting on toward noon, and time when the box office was supposed to open. Under the circumstances, however, that was out of the question. A huge piece of cardboard had hung on the door of the theater saying, "Today's performance cancelled." There was a commotion starting at the head of the line, but once it was over, the line nevertheless began to break, and in an hour there was no trace of it left on Sodovea Street. The team of investigators left to continue their work elsewhere, and theater staff was dismissed except for the watchman, and the doors of the variety were locked. The bookkeeper, Verily Stepanovic, still had two things to do right now. First, go to the Entertainment Commission to report on yesterday's events, and second, visit the commission office, the finance office, to turn over the proceeds from yesterday's performance, 21,711 rubles. Hey, 2004 Purdy, what's up? And Cat, what's up? And Monty, what's up? He's wandering around. You should see him come in and out. Look at him. He looking sporty. I'm gonna say he just stopped over there, coming back around. How is everybody's evening going? The meticulous and efficient Vasily Stepanovic wrapped the money in a newspaper tied with twine, put it in a briefcase, and knowing the procedure well, set off for the taxi stand rather than the bus or trolley stop. As soon as the drivers of 3 separate cabs spotted the prospective passenger heading toward them with a bulging briefcase, they all took off from under his nose, looking back at him for some reason with loathing. Dumbfounded, the bookkeeper stood stock still for some time, trying to figure out what it all meant. A few minutes passed, then an empty cab pulled up, but as soon as the driver took a look at the passenger, he made a face. "Are you free?" asked Vasily Stepanovic, coughing with surprise. "Show me your money," the cabbie replied angrily without looking at him. Becoming more and more dumbfounded, the bookkeeper pressed a precious briefcase under his arm, removed in a 10-ruble bill from his wallet, and showed it to the driver. "I won't take you," was the curt reply. "I beg your pardon," began the bookkeeper, but the cabbie interrupted him. "Do you have any threes?" The completely baffled bookkeeper took 2 threes out of his wallet and showed them to the driver. "Get in!" he shouted, banging the meter so hard that he almost broke it, and off they went. "Are you short of change?" the bookkeeper asked timidly. "I've got loads of change," roared the driver, his eyes bloodshot with rage, blazing in the rearview mirror. "This is the 3rd time today, and others are having the same problem. Some son of a bitch gives me a 10-ruble bill. I give him change, 450. He's gone, the bastard. 5 minutes later, I look into what I've got, a label from a bottle of mineral water instead of 10-ruble bill. Here's the cabbie let loose some unprintable words. The next guy I pick up beyond Zubovskaya Street, another 10. I give him 3 rubles change. He walks off. I rummage in change purse, and out flies B and stings me on the finger. Bastard!" The cabbie again let out a stream of unprintable words. But the 10 is gone. Yesterday at the Variety, unprintable words, some of the slimy magician did an act with 10-ruble bills, unprintable words. He is too adorable, some might say. Where are you at? Sorry, Tatum. I gotta pull my... there you are. So I can focus you appropriately. Are you adorable? Bless you. The bookkeeper was stunned. He shrunk back in his seat and acted as if he were hearing the word variety for the first time, but meanwhile he thought, boy, oh boy, he appreciates it. Having reached his destination, the bookkeeper paid the driver without any problem. He entered the building, and as he headed down the corridor to the director's office, he saw that he had come too late. The office of the Entertainment Commission was in chaos. A messenger girl ran past the bookkeeper with her eyes bulging and her kerchief askew. "He's not there! Not there! Not there, my dears!" she was screaming to no one knows whom. "His jacket and trousers are there, but there's nothing in his jacket." She disappeared behind a door, and immediately afterwards sounds of breaking dishes were heard. The head of the first section, whom the bookkeeper knew, ran out in the secretary's room, but he was in such a state that he didn't recognize the bookkeeper and disappeared somewhere without a trace. Shaken by all of this, the bookkeepers reached the secretary's room, which served as an anteroom to the chairman's office, and here he was utterly thunderstruck. A menacing voice could be heard coming through the closed door of the office, a voice that unmistakably belonged to Pokor Petrovic, the chairman of the commission. "Who is he raking over the coals now, I wonder?" thought the flustered bookkeeper, and as he looked around he saw something else that was unnerving. There was a leather armchair, sobbing uncontrollably and clutching a wet handkerchief. They're in a leather armchair. I'm sitting here being like, a leather armchair is sobbing uncontrollably? That's not good. There, in a leather armchair, sobbing uncontrollably and clutching a wet handkerchief, her head thrown back and her legs stretched out into the middle of the room, was Pokor Petrovic, personal secretary. The beautiful Anna Richardovna. There we go. Richardovna. She had lipstick all over her chin, and black streams of mascara ran down her eyelashes and over her peach-like cheeks. When she saw who had come in, Anna Richardovna jumped up and threw herself at the bookkeeper. Grabbing his lapels, she shook him and screamed, "Thank God, at least there's one brave soul. They all ran off. They all betrayed him. Come with me and see him. I don't know what else to do." And still sobbing, she dragged the bookkeeper into the office. Once there, the first thing the bookkeeper did was drop his briefcase. Everything in his head went topsy-turvy, and it must be said, with good reason. Behind the huge desk was a massive inkwell. With its massive inkwell sat an empty suit, moving a pen with no ink in it over a sheet of paper. The suit was wearing a tie and had a fountain pen sticking out of its breast pocket, and there was no neck and no head above the collar, nor were there any wrists poking out of the sleeves. The suit was hard at work and completely oblivious to the confusion raging all around. Hearing someone come in, the suit leaned back in its chair, from above its collar came the voice of Pokor Petrovic, so familiar to the bookkeeper. "What is it? The sign on the door says that I am not seeing anyone." The beautiful secretary let out a shriek, wrung her hands, and screamed, "See, did you see? He isn't there, he's not! Bring him back, bring him back!" Just then, someone poked his head in the door, groaned, and then left. The bookkeeper felt his legs start to tremble and sat down on the edge of the chair, but he didn't forget to pick up his briefcase. Anna Richardovna kept jumping around him, grabbing at his suit and yelling, "I always tried to stop him when he used the devil oaths, and now he's bedeviled himself." At this point, she ran over to the desk and in a soft musical voice that was still slightly nasal sounding from so much crying, she exclaimed, "Prosha! Where are you? Who are you calling Prosha? The suit asked haughtily, sinking deeper into the chair. It doesn't recognize me, it doesn't. Don't you see? Sobbed the secretary. Please don't sob in the office, said the iris-sky striped suit, already angry, extending its sleeve for a fresh stack of papers, obviously intending to attach memos to them. No, I can't look at this. No, I can't, cried Anna Richardovna, and ran out into the anteroom, followed by a shot by the bookkeeper. Just imagine, I was sitting here, began Anna Richardovna, trembling with agitation, and once again grabbing the bookkeeper by his sleeve, and in walks a cat, black, big as a hippopotamus. I naturally screamed, "Scat!" He takes off, and a fat man with a kind of cat-like mug comes in instead. He says to me, "Are you the one who screamed scat to the visitors?" And he goes into Pokor Petrovic. Naturally, I follow him and yell, "Have you gone crazy?" But the brazen fellow goes right up to Prokhor Petrovic and sits down in the chair opposite. Well, Prokhor Petrovic, he's the nicest man you'll ever meet, but he's high-strung. He just blew up. I don't deny it. He's irritable, works like a horse, and he blew up. "How dare you," he says, burst in unannounced, and just imagine that stack Alec sank right back in his chair and said, smiling, "But I've come," he says, "on a little matter of business. Pokor Petrovic blew up again. I'm busy." And on the other one, you can believe he says, "You're not busy with anything at all." How do you like that? Well, naturally, at that point, Pekor Petrovic's patience ran out, and he shouted, "What the hell is this? Get him out of here. The devil take me." And then, just imagine, the other one flashes a grin and says, "You want the devil to take you? That can be arranged." And bang! Before I can let out a scream, I see the guy with the cat-like mug is gone and sitting there in that suit. "Oh!" howled Anna Richardovna, her mouth stretched so wide that it lost its shape. She choked back her sobs and took a deep breath, and then she said something completely nonsensical. "And it writes. It drives you crazy. Talks on the phone, a suit, everyone's run off like a scared rabbit." The bookkeeper merely stood there shaking. But at this point, fate came to his rescue, striding into the antler room in a calm and business-like way came the militia, that is, 2 policemen. When she saw them, the beautiful secretary began sobbing even harder and pointed to the door. "Come now, citizens, let us not have any crying," said the first policeman calmly. The bookkeeper, feeling his presence to be completely superfluous, left the antler room, and a minute later was out in the fresh air. There seemed to be a draft blowing inside his head like wind ringing in a pipe, and in this ringing he could hear bits and pieces of the ushered tales about the cat that took part in yesterday's performance. Aha! Could our cat friend be making a return appearance? Having made no progress at all at the commission, the conscientious Vasily Stepanovich decided to visit the branch office located in Vagankovsky Lane. To calm himself down a bit, he made a trip on foot. The Moscow branch office of the Entertainment Commission was located in an old house, peeling from age, set far back in the country yard, and was famous for the porphyr columns in its vestibule. On this particular day, however, visitors were less struck by the columns than they were by what was going on beneath them. Several visitors stood frozen to a spot, staring at the young lady who was sitting and weeping at the table, where all of the entertainment literature was displayed and sold. At the moment in question, she was not engaged in salesmanship of any kind, and was instead waving off all sympathetic questions with a flick of her wrist. Meanwhile, from upstairs and downstairs, from every side and every department of the building, came a clanging at least 20 phones. After crying for a bit, the young lady suddenly shuddered and shouted out hysterically, "Here we go again!" and then broke out the quavering soprano. "A glorious sea, our sacred Baikal!" A messenger who appeared on the staircase threatened someone with his fist and then joined the young woman, singing in a dull, toneless baritone. "Glorious the ship, the barrel of salmon." The messenger's voice was joined by others coming from further away. The chorus swelled, and soon the song echoed from every corner of the branch office. In room number 6, the closest by, where the accountant's department was, a powerful, slightly hoarse, deep bass rang out above other voices. Accompanying by the choir was the intensified clanging of the telephones. "Hail, northeast wind, rolled out the beakers," roared the messengers from on the staircase. Tears streamed down the young woman's face. She tried to clench her teeth, but her mouth opened on its own accord. In an octave higher than the messenger, she sang, "The fine fellow hasn't far to go." Speechless visitors were struck by the fact that although the Christors were scattered throughout different rooms, they sang very harmoniously, as if the whole chorus were standing in one place, with its eyes glued to the invisible conductor. Pedestrians on Vagankovsky Lane stopped by the courtyard gates and marveled at the gaiety that reigned in the branch office. As soon as the first verse came to an end, the singing stopped abruptly, as if it were again obeying a conductor's baton. The messenger swore under his breath and ran off somewhere. Here, the front doors opened, and the man appeared in a summer overcoat, a white robe showing below the hem. He was in the company of a policeman. "Do something, doctor, I beg of you," the young woman cried hysterically. The secretary of the branch office ran out on the staircase, obviously ashamed and embarrassed. He started stammering. "Don't you see, doctor? We have a case here of mass hysteria of some kind. It's so essential that—" He didn't finish the sentence, began to choke on his words, and suddenly rang out in the tenor, "Shilka and Nershingsk." "Fool," the young woman managed to yell, but rather than explain whom she was calling a fool, she broke into a forced roulade and started singing about Shilka and Nershing herself. "Get a hold of yourself! Stop singing!" the doctor said to the secretary. It was obvious that the secretary would have given anything in the world to be able to stop singing, but he could not. And together with the chorus, his voice rang with the news, heard by pedestrians on the street, that in the wilds he was untouched by voracious beasts and unscathed by marksmen's bullets. At the end of the verse, the young woman was the first to receive a dose of valerian from the doctor, who then ran after the secretary and the others so that he could do the same to them. "Excuse me, my young citizeness," said Vasily Stepanovich, suddenly addressing the young woman, "but has a black cat been here by any chance?" "What cat?" she screamed angrily. "It was an ass that we've got in this office, a real ass." And then she added, Let him hear. I'll tell the whole story." And she did, in fact, go on to relate what had happened. It turned out that the director of Moscow branch office, who had made a complete mess of the leisure activity program, the young woman's words exactly, had a mania for organizing all kinds of clubs and circles. "He was trying to butter up his superiors." Excuse me, yelled the young woman. Excuse me. In just a year's time, the director had managed to organize a Lermontov study group, a chess and checkers club, a ping-pong club, a horseback riding club, and he threatens to have 2 additional clubs in place by summer, one for freshwater rowing and the other for mountain climbing. Thank you, Vanya. And then today, during the lunch break, the director walks in and he's leading some Sunny Beach by the hand, related the young woman, who comes from nobody knows where, and who's wearing tight checkered trousers and a cracked pinnace with an unbelievable mug on him. And then, according to the young woman, he introduced him to everyone in the cafeteria as a noted specialist in an organization of choral groups. The faces of the would-be mountain climbers clouded over, but the director encouraged everyone to be enthusiastic, and the specialist cracked jokes and showed off his wit, and gave his solemn word that the singing would take up hardly any time and would incidentally be extremely advantageous for everyone. Well, naturally, as the young woman reported, the first to jump up were Fanov and Kosarchuk, notorious office toadies, who announced that they were going to join the chorus. The rest of the staff then realized that there was no way to escape it, so they said that they would join too. It was decided that the singing would take place during the lunch break, since the rest of the time was taken up with Lermontovs and checkers. The director, in order to set a good example, announced that he was a tenor and that he was beginning then that was the beginning of the nightmare. The choir master specialist in checks intoned do mi sol do, and he dragged the shy ones out of the closets where they were hiding to avoid singing and told Kosarchuk that he had absolute pitch. Then he started to whine and bare his teeth, asked everyone to humor an old choir master, struck a tuning fork, and begged them to strike up a chorus of Gloria C. They did. And gloriously. The fellow in checks really did know his business. When they had finished the first verse, the choir master excused himself and said, "I'll be back in a minute," and disappeared. They thought that he really would return in a minute, but then 10 minutes passed, and he still wasn't back. They were overcome with joy and that he'd run away, and suddenly they started singing the second verse as if of their own accord, following the lead of Kosarchuk, whose pitch may not have been perfect, but did have quite a pleasant high tenor. They finished the second verse, still no choir master. They went back to their place, but before they could manage to sit down, they started singing again, against their will. It was beyond their power to stop. They would be quiet for 3 minutes or so and then start up again. At this point, they realized that something bad had happened. Mortified, the director locked himself in his office. It was here that the young woman's story broke off. The Valerian had been no help at all. 15 minutes later, 3 trucks drove up to the gates on Vagankovsky Lane, and the director of the branch office and the rest of the staff got in. Just as the first truck came to pitching a halt at the gates and then pulled into the lane, the office staff, who were standing in the back, their arms around one another, opened their mouths and filled the streets with song. The second truck followed suit, and then the third, and they all drove off. Pedestrians going about their business cast only a fleeting glance at the trucks, manifesting no curiosity whatsoever and assuming that they were going on an excursion outside of the city. And they were, in fact, going outside of the city. Only not on an excursion. They were going to Professor Stravinsky's clinic. We're just getting everybody in the clinic right now. Half an hour later, the bookkeeper arrived at the finance office in a completely befuddled state, with hopes of finally divesting himself of yesterday's receipts. Having learned from experience, he peered cautiously into the oblong office where the clerks sat behind frosted glass windows with gold lettering. The bookkeeper could see no signs of upset or disarray. Everything was quiet, just as one would expect in a proper establishment. Vasily Stepanovich stuck his head in the window, which had a sign above it saying "Deposits." Said hello to the clerk, whom he did not know, and politely asked for a deposit slip. "Why do you need one?" asked the clerk behind the window. The bookkeeper was perplexed. "I want to hand over my cash receipts. I'm from the Variety." "Just a minute," replied the clerk, and then proceeded to put a screen over the hole in his window. "That's odd. thought the bookkeeper. His perplexity was natural under the circumstances. It was the first time that he had ever encountered such a thing. Everyone knows how hard it is to acquire money. Obstacles to that can always be found. But not once in his 30 years of experience had a bookkeeper ever found anyone, whether an official or private citizen, who had difficulty accepting money. But at last the screen had moved aside, and the bookkeeper again leaned up to the window. "Do you have a lot?" asked the clerk. 21,711 rubles. "Wow!" replied the clerk with inexplicable irony, and handed him a green slip of paper. Having seen the form 100 times, the bookkeeper filled it out instantly and began untying his package. When he removed the wrapping, his eyes glazed over, and he let out an agonizing groan. Foreign currency flashed over his eyes. Packets of Canadian dollars, English pounds, Dutch guilders, Latvian lats, and Estonian crowns. "Here he is, one of those tricksters from Variety," boomed an intimidating voice at the stunned bookkeeper's back, and Vasily Stepanovich was then taken into custody. The bomb destroyed that poor star. At the same time as the conscientious bookkeeper was in the taxi en route to his encounter with the riding suit, a respectably dressed man with a small imitation leather suitcase was getting off the reserved seat first-class car of the number 9 train from Kiev. This passenger was none other than Maximilian Andreyevich Poplavsky, the uncle of the late Berlois, an economic planner who lived in Kiev on what was formerly Institute Street. The reason for his trip to Moscow was a telegram received late in the evening 2 days before. It said, "I have just been cut in half by a stretcher at Patriarch's. Funeral Friday, 3 p.m. Come, Berlois." Maximilian Andreyevich was considered one of the smartest men in Kiev, and justifiably so. But even the smartest man would be befuddled by the telegram like that. If a man can wire that he has been cut in half, it's obvious that it wasn't a fatal accident. But then why mention a funeral? Or could it be that he's in a very bad shape and foresees that he is going to die? That was a distinct possibility, but the preciseness of the information was odd nonetheless. How could he know that his funeral was going to be at precisely 3 p.m. on Friday? An amazing telegram. But what are the smart people smart for, if not untangled tangled things? It was very simple. There had been a mistake, and the message had been transmitted in garbled form. The word "I" had obviously come from another telegram and then put where Berlois should have been, at the beginning of the telegram, instead of at the end where it ended up. After such a correction to the telegram became intelligible, albeit, of course, tragic. After the attack of grief which struck his wife had subsided, Maximilian Andreyevich began to make plans to go to Moscow. Maximilian Andreyevich had a secret that must be revealed. Although he did indeed feel sorry for his wife's nephew who had died in the prime of his life, he was a practical man, and he saw that there was no particular need for him to attend the funeral. Nevertheless, Maximilian Andreyevich had been in a great hurry to get to Moscow. What made him do it? Only one thing. The apartment. An apartment in Moscow. That's serious business. No one knows why, but Maximilian Andreyevich didn't like Kiev, and the thought of moving to Moscow had gnawed at him persistently so recently that he began to lose sleep over it. One second, I just dropped an earring. Found it. He got no pleasure from the Dnieper overflowing in the spring when the islands on the lower shore became flooded and the water emerged with the horizon. He got no pleasure from the striking beauty of the view of the base of Prince Vladimir's statue, the patches of sun that played on the brick paths of Vladimir Hill in the spring gave him no joy. He wanted none of that. He wanted just one thing, to move to Moscow. The ads he placed in the paper offering to exchange his Institute Street apartment in Kiev for a small flat in Moscow had produced no results. There were no takers, and if someone did turn up once in a while, the offer was made in bad faith. The telegram had given Maximilian Andreevich a shock. It would be a sin to pass up an opportunity. Practical people know the opportunity doesn't knock twice. In a word, come hell or high water, he had to make sure that he inherited his nephew's apartment on Sedayova Street. True, it would be difficult, very difficult, but the difficulties had to be overcome no matter what. As an experienced man of the world, Maximilian Andreevich knew the first thing that he had to do was accomplish his goal to get registered, if only on a temporary basis, in his late nephew's three-room apartment. On Friday afternoon, Maximilian Andreevich walked into the office of a housing committee of number 302B, Sadovaya Street in Moscow. In a narrow room, where there was an old poster on the wall showing in several drawings ways of reviving someone drowning in the river, an unshaven middle-aged man with frightened-looking eyes sat behind a wooden desk all by himself. "May I see the chairman of the housing committee?" the economic planner inquired politely, taking off his hat and putting his suitcase on the chair by the doorway. This, it would seem, simplest of questions, so unnerved the man at the desk that a change came over his face. Squinting with alarm, he mumbled incomprehensibly that the chairman was not there. "Is he in his apartment?" asked Poplavsky. "I'm here on a very urgent matter." The seated man reply again was incoherent. But even so, the implication was that the chairman was not in his apartment either. "When will he be back?" The seated man said nothing in reply, and looked out the window with some kind of anguish. "Aha!" said the smart Poplavsky to himself, and inquired after the secretary. The strange man at the desk turned purple from the strain, again incomprehensibly said that the secretary wasn't there either, that he was ill, and that no one knew when he would come back. "Aha!" said Pavlovsky to himself. "But is there anyone here from the housing committee?" "Me," the man answered. "You see," Pavlovsky began impressively, "I am the sole heir to the deceased Berlois, my nephew, who, as you know, died at Patriarch's Pond, and I am bound by the law to assume the inheritance that consists of our apartment, number 50. "I don't know anything about it, comrade," interrupted the man. "But you see, you are a member of the committee and are obliged to—" At this point, a man walked into the room. The man at the desk took one look at him and turned pale. "Committee member Pyatnazko?" asked the new arrival. "Yes," the man at the desk barely said in inaudible tones. The newcomer whispered something to him, and the latter became completely flustered, got up from the desk, and seconds later Poplavsky was left alone in the empty housing office. "Oh, what a complication. All I needed was to have them all of a sudden be," he thought Poplavsky with annoyance as he crossed the asphalt courtyard and hurried to the apartment number 50. As soon as the economic planner rang the bell, the door opened. Maximilian Andreevich entered the darkened hallway. He was a little surprised that he couldn't tell who had opened the door. There was no one in the hallway except a huge black cat who was sitting on a chair. Maximilian Andreevich coughed, stamped his feet, and then the study door opened and out walked Korolyov into the hallway. Maximilian Andreevich bowed politely to him and said with dignity, "My name is Poplavsky. I am the uncle." But before he could finish, Korolyov pulled a dirty handkerchief out of his pocket, buried his nose in it, and burst into tears. "Of the deceased Berlois." I know," interrupted Korolyov, removing the handkerchief from his face. "The minute I laid eyes on you, I guessed it was you." Then he was convulsed with tears and cried out, "What a tragedy! Ah! How could such a thing happen?" "Run over by a street cart?" asked Poplovsky in a whisper. Killed instantly, shouted Korovyov, and the tears started streaming from under his pinez. Instantly! I was there, I saw it, believe me, it happened in a flash. Off went the head, and then the right leg, crunch right into, and then the left, crunch right into. That's what you get with streetcars. Apparently unable to control himself, Korolyov turned his face to the wall next to the mirror and began shaking with sobs. Berloiz's uncle was genuinely struck by the stranger's behavior. And they say people aren't sensitive nowadays, he thought, feeling his eyes begin to smart. However, at just that moment, a bothersome little cloud settled over his soul, and a reptilian thought flickered. Could this sincere and sensitive fellow already have registered himself in this deceased's apartment? Such things have been known to happen, after all. Excuse me, but were you a friend of my dear departed Misha? He asked, wiping his dry left eye with his sleeve and studying the grief-stricken Korolyov with the right. But the latter was in such a paroxysm of tears that nothing he said was intelligible except for crunch right into, in which he kept repeating. And after he had cried himself out, Korolyov finally unglued himself from the wall and said, "No, I can't take it anymore. I am going to take 300 drops of valerian," and turned his utterly tear-drenched face to Polovsky, who added, "Those damned streetcars!" "Pardon me, but was it you who sent me the telegram?" asked Maximilian Andreevich, agonizing over who this amazing crybaby could be. "He did," answered Korolyov, pointing to the cat. Poplovsky's eyes bulging, thought that he had misheard. "No, I can't go on. I haven't the strength," Korolyov went on, sniffling. "When I think of the wheel going over his leg, one wheel alone weighs about 360 pounds. Crunch! I'll go lie down and lose myself in sleep," at which point he vanished from the hallway. The cat stirred, jumped down from the chair, stood on its hind legs and spread its forepaws, opened its jaw and said, "Well, I sent the telegram. Now what?" Maximilian Andreevich's head started spinning. His arms and legs became paralyzed, and he dropped his suitcase and sat down on the chair opposite the cat. "I believe I asked you in Russian," the cat said sternly. "Now what?" But Poplovsky gave no reply. "Passport!" snapped the cat and stretched out a chubby paw, completely at a loss and unable to see anything but the sparks burning in the cat's eyes. Poplovsky pulled his passport out of his pocket as if he were in danger. The cat removed a pair of black, thick-rimmed glasses from the table under the mirror and put them on his snout, which made it look even more impressive, and took the passport from Poplovsky's trembling hand. "I wonder, will I faint or not?" thought Poplovsky. Korolyov's sobbing could be heard in the distance, and the smell of ether, valerian, and some other nauseating abomination filled the entire hallway. "Which department issued this document?" asked the cat, staring at it intently. No answer was forthcoming. "Department 412. Department 412, replied the cat to himself, tracing his paw over the passport, which he held upside down. "But of course, I know that department very well. They gave passports to anyone who walks in, but I, on the other hand, wouldn't give a passport to someone like you. Not on your life. One look at you, and I'd refuse you on the spot." At this point, the cat became so enraged that he threw the passport on the floor. "Permissions to attend the funeral is hereby revoked," the cat continued in an official-sounding voice. "Be so kind as to return to your place of residence." He then bellowed through the door, "Azazel!" It's the little details, yep. In answer to his call, a short little man ran into the hallway. He walked with a limp, wore black tights, had a knife stuck to his to the inside of his leather belt, was red-haired and had a yellow fang and a cataract clouding his left eye. Pavlovsky felt that he was suffering, got up from his chair, and staggered backward, his hand clutching his heart. "Azazello! Show him out," ordered the cat, and walked out. "Pavlovsky," the recently arrived said softly with a nasally twang, "I hope by now everything is completely clear." Pavlovsky nodded. "Return to Kiev immediately," Azello continued. "Stay quiet as a mouse and stop dreaming about apartments in Moscow. Is that clear?" The short little man, who scared Pavlovsky to death with the fangs, his knife, and his cataract, only came up to the economist's shoulders, but his action was smooth, efficient, and forceful. First, he picked up the passport and handed it to Maximilian Andreevich, and the latter took it with a lifeless hand. Then the one called Azazello picked up the suitcase with one hand and threw open the door with the other. Taking Berloiz's uncle by the arm, he escorted him out to the landing. Pavlovsky leaned against the wall. Azazello opened the suitcase without the benefit of the key, took out a huge roast chicken with only one drumstick wrapped in greasy newspaper, and put it down on top of the stairs. Then he pulled out 2 pairs of underwear, a razor strop, a book, and a case, and kicked everything except the chicken down the stairs. The empty suitcase was also sent flying. Judging by the sound that it made when it crashed, its top landed off. Next, the red-haired thug grabbed the chicken by its legs and slammed it so roughly and savagely across Pavlovsky's neck that the carcass flew apart, leaving Azazello with only the drumstick in hand. Everything was in a state of confusion in the Oblinsky household, as the famous writer Lev Tolstoy so justly put it. He would have said the same thing here indeed, too. Everything in Pavlovsky's vision was jumbled. A long spark flashed before his eyes, which then converted into a black serpent, which for an instant blotted out the May sun. Pavlovsky then went flying down the stairs, passport in hand. Then he reached the turn on the stairs. He smashed the window pane with his foot and sat down on the steps. The legless chicken tumbled past him and fell onto the staircase. Azazello, still at the top of the stairs, devoured the drumstick in a flash and stuck the bone on the side of the pocket of his thigh, after which he went back to the apartment and shut the door with a bang. It was then that the cautious footsteps of someone coming up the stairs were heard. After running down another flight, Pavlovsky sat down on a small wooden bench on the landing to catch his breath. A diminutive elder gentleman with an unusual sad face, wearing an old-fashioned tussore silk suit and a stiff straw hat with a green band, was coming up the stairs. He stopped near Pavlovsky. "May I ask you, citizen," the man in the tussore silk inquired sadly, "where is apartment number 50? "Upstairs," was Pavlovsky's abrupt reply. "My humble thanks, sir," the man replied equally as sadly, proceeded up the stairs, while Pavlovsky got up from the bench and ran downstairs. The question arises, did Maximilian Andreevich rush off to the police station to lodge a complaint against the thugs who had brutalized him so savagely in broad daylight? Emphatically, no, not at all. That can be said with confidence. To go to the police and say that a cat wearing glasses had just examined your passport and that a man in tights with a knife had... No, citizens, Maximilian Andreevich was far too smart for that. When he got to the bottom of the stairs, he saw a door off to the exit leading to a closet-like room. The window on the door had been knocked out. Pavlovsky put his passport away in his pocket and looked around, hoping to spot his scattered belongings. But there was no trace of them. Pavlovsky himself was surprised at how little that upset him. There was something else on his mind, an intriguing and tempting thought. To use that little man to test the apartment again. He had asked where it was. which meant that it was a first visit. This, in turn, meant that it would fall into the clutches of a gang who had taken over apartment number 50. Something told Pavlovsky that the little man would be exiting the apartment momentarily. Naturally, Maximilian Andreevich no longer had any plans to attend his nephew's funeral, and there was still time before the train departed for Kiev. The economist looked around and slipped into the closet. At this moment, the door banged far upstairs. That's him going in, thought Pavlovsky, his heart sinking. It was cool in the closet, and it smelled of mice and boots. Maximilian Andreevich sat down on some kind of wood stump and decided to wait for the closet that he had a good view of the door to maintain entrance number 6. The Kievian had to wait longer than he expected, however. For some reason, the staircase remained deserted. He could hear well, and finally the door banged on the 5th floor. Pavlovsky froze. Yes, these were footsteps. He's coming down. A door opened on the floor below. The footsteps halted. A woman's voice, a sad voice in reply. Yes, it was his voice. It said something like, "Leave me alone, for Christ's sake." Pavlovsky's ear was pressed close to the broken window. It caught the sound of a woman laughing. Brisk and determined steps came down the stairs. The woman's back flashed by. The woman was carrying a green oilcloth bag, and she went out the entrance into the courtyard. The footsteps of the little man started up again. That's strange. He's going back up to the apartment. Could he himself be one of the gangs? Yes, he's going back. That's the door opening upstairs. Oh well. We'll wait a little longer. This time he did not have to wait long. The sounds of a door, steps halting, a desperate cry, the meowing of a cat, quick, rapid footsteps coming down, down, down. Pavlovsky got what he had waited for. The sad little man flew by, crossing himself and muttering something. He was hatless, looked crazed, his bald head was scratched, and his trousers were soaking wet. He began pulling at the doorknob, so traumatized that he could not only whether the door opened in or out. I cannot tell. Sorry, Tatli. Give me a second. You can turn on a little air. He finally managed to get it right and flew into the sunshine of the courtyard. His test of the apartment concluded. Pavlovsky lost all interest in both his deceased nephew and the apartment. Trembling at the thought of the danger to which he had subjected himself, Maximilian Andreevich ran out into the courtyard, mumbling just 3 words. "It's all clear. It's all clear. Hello, what's up? I hope that your sprints are going well, or if you're done with them, went well." Minutes later, a trolley was carrying the economic planner in the direction of Kiev Station. While the economist was sitting downstairs in the closet-like room, the little old man was having the most unpleasant experience upstairs. He was the bartender of a variety theater, and his name was Andrei Fokish Sokov. While the investigation was in progress at the theater, Andrei Fokish... Ooh, Bobby. I hope that your cooking is going well. Andrei Fokish had kept apart from the proceedings, and the only thing noticeable about him was that he seemed sadder than usual. And in addition to that, he had tried to find out from Karpov, the messenger, where the visiting magician was staying. And so, after leaving the economist on the landing, the bartender had gone up to the 5th floor and rung the bell of apartment number 50. The door was opened immediately, but the bartender shuddered, stumbled back, and did not go in immediately. An understandable reaction. The door had been opened by a girl wearing nothing but a white maid's cap and a coquettish lace apron. She did, however, have gold slippers on her feet. The girl's figure was superb, and the only thing wrong with her otherwise flawless exterior was the purplish scar on her neck. "Well, come in, since you rang," said the girl, fixing her lecherous green eyes on the bartender. Andrei Fokich gulped blinked and took off his hat as he stepped into the entrance hall. Just then, the telephone in the entrance hall started to ring. The shameless maid put one leg on the chair, picked up the receiver, and said, "Hello." Not knowing where to put his eyes, the bartender shifted from one foot to the other and thought, "That's some maid the foreigners got. Phew, what filth!" And to save himself from such filth, he looked off to the side. The entire large, semi-dark entrance hall was crammed with unusual objects and articles of clothing. A funeral cape with a fiery red lining was slung over the back of a chair, and on the table under the mirror there was a long sword with a shiny gold hilt. Standing in the corner, as nonchalantly as canes or umbrellas, were 3 swords with silver hilts, and hanging on deer antlers were berets with eagle feathers. "Yes," the maid was saying into the phone. Who is it? Baron Magel? Hello. Yes, the artiste is on today. Yes, he'll be happy to see you. Yes, there'll be guests. Tails or black dinner jacket? What? Before midnight. After finishing her conversation, the maid put back the receiver and turned to the bartender. "What can I do for you?" I have to see Citizen Artist." "Is that so? In person?" "Yes," answered the bartender. "I'll ask," said the maid, evidently hesitating and barely opening the door into the late Berloise's study. She announced, "Sir, there's a little man here who says he needs to see Messier." "Messier? We did this last time." "So you mean," came Korolyov's cracked voice in the study. "Go into parlor," the girl said simply, as she wore Messier. Thank you. As if she were dressed like a normal person, and she opened the door to the parlor and left the entrance hall. When he entered the room he had been invited into, the bartender was so struck by the furnishings that he forgot why he had come. Streaming through the large stained glass windows, the whim of the jeweler's wife, who had vanished without a trace, was an extraordinary light, similar to the light of a church. Wood was burning in the huge old-fashioned fireplace, despite the hot spring day. Yet it was not the least bit hot in the room. In fact, quite the opposite. A cellar-like dampness enveloped the man entering the room. Sitting on a tiger skin in front of the fireplace was a huge black cat, squinting contentedly at the fire. There was a table that made the God-fearing bartender shudder when he saw it. The table was covered with a brocaded altar cloth. An altar cloth. Numerous bottles were arranged, pot-bellied, dusty, and moldy. Amidst the bottles, a plate gleamed at, and it was immediately obvious the plate was made of pure gold. By the fireplace, a short red-headed man with a knife in his belt was roasting pieces of meat skewered on a long steel sword, and the juice from the meat dripped in a fire, and the smoke went up the chimney. It smelled not only of roast meat, but a very strong perfume and incense, which made the bartender, who had learned of Berloise's death and his place of residence from the newspapers, wondered if they weren't performing some kind of requiem mass for him. However, that notion was so preposterous that he dismissed it out of hand. The stunned bartender suddenly heard a deep bass say, "Well, sir, how can I help you?" There, in the shadows, was the one whom the bartender needed to see. The black magician lay sprawled on the immense couch that was low on the floor and strewn with pillows. It seemed to the bartender that the artiste was wearing nothing but black underwear and black pointed slippers. "I," the bartender began bitterly, "am the chief bartender and buffet manager at Variety Theater." The artiste stretched out a hand sparkling with precious stones, as if to seal the bartender's lips, and began speaking heatedly. "No, no, no, not another word. Not in any circumstances, never. I wouldn't put a thing from that buffet of yours into my mouth. Most vulnerable, sir. Pass your country past your counter yesterday, and I still can't forget the sturgeon and the brinza's cheese. My good man, the brinza isn't supposed to be green. Someone must have deceived you. It's supposed to be white. And the tea, ugh, dishwater. With my own eyes, I saw some sloppy girl pour unboiled water out of a pail into your lungs, samovar, yet they continued pouring tea from it anyway. No, my dear fellow, that's not the way to do things. Excuse me? Began Andrei Fokish, stunned by the sudden attack. But I didn't come about that. The sturgeon is not issue. How can you not be issue if it is spoiled? They sent us sturgeon that's second grade fresh, said the bartender. Dear fellow, that's absurd. What's absurd? Second grade fresh. That's absurd. Freshness comes in only one grade. First grade, and that's it. And if the sturgeon's second grade fresh, it means that it is rotten. Excuse me? The bartender said once again, not knowing how to escape the artiste's tongue-lashing. I cannot excuse you, the latter said firmly. But I didn't come about that. You didn't? The foreign magician asked in amazement. And what is it, then? I forgot he's supposed to be Southern. That brought you here. If my memory doesn't deceive me, I've known only one other person in your line of work, and that was the Lady Sutler, and that was long before you were even born. However, I am glad that you came. Zellalo, a stool for our bar manager. The one roasting the meat turned around, terrifying the bartender with his fangs, and deftly handed him one of the low, dark oak stools. There was nothing else in the room to sit on. Thank you very much, said the bartender, lowering himself onto the stool, and the back leg of which then caved in with a crash. The bartender let out a groan and hit his rump painfully against the floor as he fell. His leg upset another stool nearby, spilling a full glass of red wine all over his trousers. The artiste exclaimed, "Oh, did you hurt yourself?" Azazelo helped the bartender to get up and offered him another seat. In a grief-stricken voice, the bartender refused his host's suggestions that he remove his trousers and dry them in front of the fire. Feeling extremely uncomfortable in his wet underwear and clothes, he sat down gingerly on the other stools. I love sitting low on the ground, said the artist, because then falling off isn't so dangerous. Now then, we were talking about the sturgeon, were we not? My dear fellow, freshness, freshness, and more freshness. That should be every buffet manager's motto. Yeah, well, wouldn't you like to have a taste? Here, the crimson glow of the fireplace, a sword flashed in front of the bartender, and Azazel put a sizzling piece of meat on the gold platter. He sprinkled it with lemon juice and handed the bartender a two-pronged gold fork. Thank you very much. It's just going to be what it be when it come out, bruh. Azazelo. It's Azazelo. I shouldn't joke pronounce it poorly because I will get stuck saying the wrong pronunciation. That happened to you guys? Squat. Yeah, get your buns and thighs in. No, try it. Out of politeness, the bartender put a piece in his mouth and realized immediately that he was eating something that was truly fresh and what more, unusually tasty. Is it human? But even so, as the bartender chewed the fragrant, succulent meat, he almost choked and fell a second time. A large, dark bird flew in from the adjoining room. Vanya, I didn't know you were in this. Softly brushing its wings against the bartender's bald head. All alighting on the mantelpiece next to the clock, it turned out to be an owl. Oh my god, thought Andre Fokish, who, like all bartenders, was nervous and edgy. This is some apartment. You always are? Fair. Patareka, that's fair. Super floss, that's fair. You get like a 50-50 chance with me if I read, when I'm reading, if I say cacophony or cacophony. Macabre and macabre is also one that switches back and forth for me. Then I remember how to spell denouement by remembering denouement. Freaking French. Doesn't. A glass of wine? White? Red? Which imported wine do you prefer at this hour? Thank you, but I don't drink. How unfortunate. How about a game of dice? Or do you like some other games? Dominoes, cards? I don't play, replied the already weary bartender. That's the limit. This is, if you don't mind my saying so, something sinister about men who avoid wine, games, the company of charming women, and good dinner table conversation. People like that are either seriously ill or they secretly disdain their fellow man. True, there are exceptions. Among those who have feasted with me there have sometimes been extraordinary cats. And so, tell me, what brings you here? Yesterday, you had occasion to perform some tricks. I? I beg your pardon. That isn't my sort of thing. Sorry, said the bartender, taken aback. But what about performance of black magic? Oh, that. Well, of course, my dear man, I tell you my secret. I'm not a stage performer at all. I just wanted to see the citizens of Moscow in mass, and the easiest way to do it was in the theater. So my retinue here arranged the performance while I merely sat and watched the Muscovites. But don't look like that. Just tell me what it is all about the performance that brought you here. If you recall, among the other things, paper money flew down from ceiling. Well, everybody started grabbing bills, and the young man comes up to me at bar and gives me 10-ruble bill, and I give him 8.50 in change. Then someone else, also a young man? No, an older man. Then a third came and a fourth, and I give them all change. And today, when I went to check a cash register, I look, and what do I see but strips of paper instead of money? The bar has 109 rubles short. Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear. Can they truly have thought that it was real money? I can't believe that they did it on purpose. The bartender looked around wryly and miserably, but said nothing. Can there really have been swindlers? Can there really be swindlers in Moscow? The bartender smiled so bitterly in reply that no doubt remained. There was indeed swindlers in Moscow. But that's beneath contempt, Woland said in outrage. You're a poor man. You are a poor man, aren't you? The bartender drew his head into his shoulders so that it would become obvious that he was a poor man. How much do you have in savings, dear boy? Although the question was asked sympathetically, it was impossible not to view the question like it was indelicate. The bartender squirmed. 249,000 rubles in 5 separate savings accounts, and 210 ruble gold pieces under the floor in home. The bartender seemed to be riveted to his stool. Well, that isn't so large a sum, of course, although, strictly speaking, it is of no use to you. When will you die? Here the bartender became indignant. Nobody knows that. It's nobody's business. True, nobody knows, but it is hardly Newton's binomial theorem. He'll die in 9 months, that is, next February, from cancer of the liver in the First Moscow State University Clinic, ward number 4. The bartender's face turned yellow. 9 months, Woland calculated thoughtfully. 249,000 in round numbers. That comes to 27,000 a month? Isn't that right? Not a lot, but enough if one lives modestly. And there's still gold rubles. He won't manage to cash those in, broke in the same voice, sending a chill through the bartender's heart. After Andrei Fokish dies, they'll tear down the house right away, and gold rubles will be sent to the state bank. And I wouldn't advise you to go to that clinic either. What point is there in dying in a ward, listening to the moans and rasps of the terminally ill? Wouldn't it be better to spend the last 27,000 on a banquet, then after taking a poison, depart from the other world to the sound of violins, surrounded by intoxicated, beautiful women and dashing friends? The bartender sat motionless and seemed to have gotten much older. His eyes had dark circles around them, and his cheeks drooped, and his lower jaw sagged. But we've gotten off track. Back to business. Show me your strips of paper. Shaken, the bartender pulled a package out of his pocket, untied it, and froze. Wrapped in the newspaper were 10-ruble bills. My dear fellow, you really are ill. The bartender got up from the stool, a strange smile on his face. But what if they try to again? Well then, come back and see us again. By all means, I'm happy to have made your acquaintance. Here, Korolyov popped out of the study, grabbed the bartender's hand, and started shaking it, begging Andrei Fokish to give everyone his regards. Completely befuddled, the bartender headed for the entrance hall. "Hella, show him out!" shouted Korolyov. Again, the naked redhead appeared in the hall. The bartender squeezed through the door, squeaked out a goodbye, and staggered on his way like a drunk. After going down a few steps, he stopped and sat down on the stairs. He pulled out the package and checked the contents. The 10-ruble bills were still there. At that point, a woman with a green bag came out of the apartment, facing the landing. Seeing a man sitting on the step, staring dully at the 10-ruble bill, she smiled and said pensively, "What a building we have. Only mornings and this guy already drunk. The windows on the stair is smashed again." She studied the bartender more carefully and added, "Hey, citizen, you're up to your ears in 10-ruble bills. How about throwing some away, huh?" "Leave me alone, for Christ's sake," said the bartender, fearful, and quickly hid the money. The woman laughed. "Go to hell, you old skinflint. I was just joking." And she started down the stairs. "Oh, go to hell, you old skinflint. I was just joking. Hey, Polly, what's up? Welcome." I appreciate the invitation to your elaborate pre-funeral before you die. Are we going to play laser tag? The bartender got up slowly, raised his hand to adjust his hat, and found that it wasn't on his head. The thought of going back was horrible, but he regretted the loss of his hat. He hesitated for a moment and then went back to ring the bell. "What do you want now?" asked the hellish Hella. "Drinking beer and hanging out. That sounds like a good Friday night." "I am okay. I have had concern this week, but I am okay." "I forgot my hat," whispered the bartender, poking at his bald head. Hella turned away. The bartender mentally spat and closed his eyes. When he opened them, Hella was handing him his hat and a sword with a dark hilt. "That's not mine," whispered the bartender, pushing the sword aside and quickly putting on his hat. Did you really just come? Did you really come without a sword? Marveled Hella. The bartender mumbled something and started swiftly down the stairs. For some reason, his head felt hot and uncomfortable in the hat. He took it off and jumped with a fright, let out a soft yelp. In his hand was a velvet beret with a rumpled cock's feather. The bartender crossed himself. At the very moment, the beret meowed and turned into a black kitten, which then leapt back into Andre Fokish's head and dug its claws into his bald spot. Letting out a desperate scream, the bartender plunged down the stairs, and the kitten fell off of his head and scooted back up the stairs. Bursting out into the open air, the bartender ran over to the gates at a trot and left the Devil's Den, number 302B, forever. What happened to him next is well known. After bursting through the gateway, the bartender looked around wildly as if searching for something. A minute later, he was in a drugstore across the street. Just as he uttered the words, "Tell me, please," the woman behind the counter yelled at him, "Citizen, your head is all cut up." 5 minutes later, the bartender, wearing gauze bandages, found out that the leading specialist in liver disease were considered to be Professor Bernadsky and Kuzmine. When he asked which one was closer, he lit up with joy when he learned that Kuzmine lived literally across the yard in a little white house. 2 minutes later, he was there. The house was old but very comfortable, very cozy. Thinking about it later, the bartender recalled that the first person to greet him was an elderly nurse who wanted to take his hat, but since he did not have one, she shuffled off somewhere, chewing on her toothless gums. Next came the middle-aged woman who materialized next to the window, and under what appeared to be an archway. She told him that the earliest appointment that she could give him was the 19th, no sooner. The bartender realized immediately how he could get around that. After glancing with a fading eye through the archway where three men sitting in what was manifestly a waiting room, he whispered, "I'm terminally ill." The woman looked perplexedly at his bandaged head, hesitated, and said, "Well, then," and let the bartender pass through the arch. Thanks, Polly. Tate has been limping on his left leg and just... I'm hoping he just hurt his leg and it's not worse than that. So you can't see it. I got a brace on his left leg right now, hoping that it helps give it a little bit more support. He shakes like crazy when he is standing still. So his legs are just really weak right now. But specifically, I noticed on Tuesday, it's why I didn't stream on Tuesday. His left leg was so stiff when he was walking. At that moment, the door across the way opened, a gold pinnace sparkled, and a woman in a white coat said, "Citizen, this patient has priority." Before he could turn his head, the bartender found himself in a Dr. Kuzmin's office. The room was rather long, and there was nothing frightened medical or solemn about it. What seems to be the problem?" inquired Dr. Kuzmin in a pleasant voice, looking a bit apprehensively at the bandaged head. "I've just learned from a reliable source," the bartender replied, "that I'm going to die of cancer of the liver next February. Please stop that from happening." Professor Kuzmin arched himself against the high back of his Gothic leather chair. "Excuse me, but I don't understand. You mean you have been to a doctor? Why is your head bandaged?" "What doctor?" You should have seen the doctor, replied the bartender, and suddenly his teeth began to chatter. Don't bother about the head. It has nothing to do with this. The hell with my head. It's beside the point. It's the liver cancer I want you to stop. But who was it who told you? You better believe him, the bartender implored impassionately, because he knows. I don't understand any of this. How can he know when you are going to die, especially when he is not even a doctor? In ward number 4, the bartender replied. The doctor then stared at his patient, at his head, at his damp trousers, and thought, that's all that I need. A madman. You drink vodka? Never touch the stuff, the bartender replied. A minute later, he was undressed, lying on a cold oilskin couch, and the doctor was kneading his stomach. Here it must be said that the bartender cheered up considerably. The doctor stated categorically that the bartender showed absolutely no signs, at least the present time, of liver cancer, but that since he was afraid and some charlatan had scared him to death, he should have all the necessary tests. The doctor wrote out instructions for him, explaining where he was to go and what he was to bring. In addition, he gave him a referral slip for a neuropathologist, Dr. Burrier, saying that his nerves were completely shot. How much do I owe you, doctor? The bartender asked in a soft, trembling voice as he pulled out his thick wallet. Whatever you wish, the doctor replied dryly. Thanks, Polly. The bartender took out 30 rubles and put them on the desk. You know, the thing is, as long as he still got his attitude, which he does, then I can still be mostly okay. And he's still excited as heck for food. And he still refuses to use the stairs. He would rather struggle. Because we have, like, little baby flat stairs outside in the backyard. Because we have, like, our patio that is 2 steps off the ground. It's like a little pretty typical Florida screened in area. And the steps are maybe 2 inches tall, and there are only 2 of them. They're pretty wide. Maybe it's a little higher than 2 inches. Don't trust me on that. Maybe it's 3 inches. They're not high, though. And instead of going up the 2 steps, he prefers to leap up the lip that's right next to it, because there's like the lip that goes the full height all the way around the outside, and then there's the 2 steps right in front of the door. And he will purposefully avoid the steps to jump up the lip. So he just refuses to take the stairs. Alarm, no! Is it your mom's car that's the alarm is going off? Or is it somebody else's car? He do what he wants. Freaking. When he was hurt back in September. I should say when he was having trouble with his legs back in September. I got a ramp to help him get on the bed because he wanted to get on the bed, but he couldn't jump that high, so I got him a ramp. He refused to use the ramp, so I returned the ramp and I got stairs. Refuses to use the stairs. I couldn't return the stairs, so now I'm stuck with the stairs. And then I removed the frame off of the bed, and so he can usually jump on that, though he has been more careful about that the last couple of days, but he's like, I don't want any AIDS. Get this out of my face. I am capable. Anyway, sorry. That was a tangent. Only jump. The bartender took out 30 rubles and put them on the desk, and then, with unexpected softness, as if with a cat's paw, placed a jingling stack of gold coins wrapped in newspaper on top of them. And what is that? Asked Kuzmin, twirling his mustache. Don't turn your nose up to it, doctor, the bartender whispered. I beg you, stop the cancer. Take back your gold coins, said the professor, feeling proud of himself. You'd do better to look after your nerves. Bring in urine sample tomorrow. Don't drink lots of tea. And don't use any salt on your food. Not even in my soup? Asked the bartender. Don't put salt in anything, ordered Kuzmin. Oh, the bartender exclaimed dejectedly, looking entreatingly at the doctor as he gathered up his coins and backed away towards the door. The doctor had only a few patients that evening, and by dusk the last one had left. As he was taking off his robe, he glanced at the place where the bartender had left the 3 10-ruble notes, and instead of rubles, he saw 3 Abrau Jorso champagne labels. Well, I'll be damned, muttered Kuzmin, trailing his robe over the floor and fingering the pieces of paper. Not only was he schizophrenic, he was a swindler too. But I still can't understand what he wanted from me. All of that for urine analysis? Oh, I bet he stole my coat. The doctor rushed into the entrance hall, dragging his robe by one sleeve. Kizna, Nikitshna, he shouted shrilly from the door. Check and see, and the coat's still there? And as it turned out, they all were. But when the doctor returned to his office and finally took off his robe, he stood rooted at the parquet floor, and his eyes trained on the desk. There were the labels that had been sat on. There, where the labels had been, sat a stray black kitten, looking very forlorn and meowing over a saucer of milk. What is this, pray tell? This is really, too. Kuzmin felt a chill on the back of his neck. Ksenia Nikishna rushed in when she heard the doctor's whimpering cry and calmed him down completely by telling him that one of the patients had obviously left the kitten there, and that such things often happen to doctors. They're probably poor, explained Ksenia Nikitshina. Whereas we, of course... They tried to figure out who had left the kitten surreptitiously. Suspicion fell on an old woman with a stomach ulcer. Of course she was the one. Ksenia Nikitishna said. She probably thought, I don't care if I live or die, but I feel for this poor kitten. Look, at this point, putting salt on your eggs is a suicide attempt. From your stove-shaped prison, welcome to life as a free man. A babushka. But really, cried Kuzmin, and what about the milk? Did she bring that too? And the saucer as well? She brought it in a bottle and poured it into the saucer here. No matter, take the kitten and the saucer away, said Kuzmin, escorting Ksenia Nikitishna to the door. When he went back, the situation had changed. As he was hanging up his robe, the doctor heard laughter in the courtyard. He looked out and was naturally struck dumb. A woman wearing only a chemise was running across the yard to the building opposite. The doctor even knew who it was. Marya Alexandrovna. A boy was giggling. What's going on? Said Kuzmin contemptuously. Just then, on the other side of the wall in his daughter's room, the Foxtrot Alleluia started playing on the phonograph, and at the same moment a sparrow started chirping behind Kuzmin's back. He turned around and saw a huge sparrow hopping on top of the desk. Especially on soft-boiled eggs. Scrambled are delicious. Scrabbled eggs. Just keep calm, the doctor said to himself. It may have flown in when I had my back to the window. Everything is okay, the doctor told himself, feeling in his heart that everything was not okay, and mainly, of course, because of the sparrow. When he looked at it more closely, the doctor realized immediately that it was not exactly an ordinary sparrow. The filthy bird was lame in its left foot and was behaving in an obviously affected way. Dragging the foot in a syncopated rhythm, in a word, the sparrow was doing a foxtrot to the music playing on the phonograph like a drunk at a bar. The bird acted as rudely as it knew how, staring insolently at the doctor. Kuzmin reached for a phone, thinking that he would call his old classmates and colleagues of Burye to ask him what it meant when you started seeing sparrows like that at age 60, and when your head was spinning to boot. Meanwhile, the sparrow landed on an inkstand which had been given to the doctor as a gift, befouled it. I'm not kidding. Flew up into the air, hovered briefly, and then, with a steely beak, pecked furiously at the glass on the graduation photo of class of 1894, shattering it to bits. After that, it flew out the window. Instead of calling Burye, the professor decided to call the Bureau of Leeches, saying that he, Dr. Kuzmin, wanted them to send him over some leeches right away. Okay, who is part of the Bureau of Leeches? Answer now. After putting down the receiver, the doctor turned back to his desk and immediately let out a wail. Sitting at his desk wearing a nurse's kerchief was a woman with a bag that said leeches. The doctor screamed when he saw her mouth. It was a man's mouth, crooked, open to the ears, with one fang sticking out. The nurse's eyes were dead. "I'll take the money," said the nurse in a man's bass voice. "No point in it lying around here." She raked up the champagne labels with the bird's claw and melted into thin air. 2 hours went by. Dr. Kuzmin was sitting in bed in his room, with leeches stuck to his temples, his neck, and behind his ears. On the silk quilt at his feet sat the gray-whiskered Dr. Burye, looking at him with sympathy and trying to reassure him that it was all nonsense. Outside the window, it was already night. We have no idea whether there were any other strange occurrences in Moscow that night, and we have no intention of trying to find out, since the time has come for us to proceed to part 2 of this true narrative. Follow me, reader. You are of the leeches? I'm going to say, here you go. Not you. Sorry. Boop. How is it not giving you it? How is it not doing the points? I just wanted to test it. That's weird. Here. Hey. In honor. There you go. Wait, is this one? Oh my gosh. Stop doing this to me. No! Cooperate. You know what we should try to do? Let's see if I can... Give me a second. This is an aside. Margarita. That is a spawn. That is not what I'm trying to do. Here we go. Scriptable. What the frick is that? Give me a second. I don't know if you can even see what I'm doing, but we'll see. Spawn zone, one-way teleporter. I'm just gonna, let's see. if it lets you climb the ladder. What is this star? Anyway, sorry. Margarita. Follow me, reader. Whoever told you that there is no such thing in the world as a real, true, everlasting love? May the liar have his despicable tongue cut out. Follow me, my reader, and only me, and I will show you that kind of love. No, the master was mistaken that night in the hospital when just after midnight he told Ivan bitterly that she had forgotten him. That could never be. Of course she hadn't forgotten him. First, let me tell you the secret of the secret that master didn't want to tell Ivan. His beloved's name was Margarita Nikolaevna. Everything the master said about her to the poor poet was absolutely true. What is about to happen to Mikolaya? Sorry, Mikolaya. I don't know why I just said it that way. It's fine. The author. Oh, that Mikhail. We got other Mikhails. Yes, he is. He is breaking the fourth wall. Anyway, sorry. His description of his beloved was accurate. She was beautiful and intelligent. And one more thing, it can be said with assurance that many women would have given anything to trade places with Margarita Nikolaevna. The childless 30-year-old Margarita was married to an outstanding specialist who had made an extremely important discovery of national significance. Her husband was young, handsome, kind, honest, and adored his wife. Margarita Nikolaevna and her husband occupied the entire upper floor of a beautiful house in a garden on one of the small streets near the Arbat, an enchanting spot. Anyone who wishes to can take a look at the garden and see for himself. Let him ask me, and I'll give you the address and show him the way. The house is still standing to this very day. Margarita Nikolaevna had plenty of money. Margarita Nikolaevna could buy anything that took her fancy. Her husband's circle of friends included some interesting people. Margarita Nikolaevna never touched a Primus stove. Margarita Nikolaevna was ignorant of the horrors of life in a communal apartment. In a word, was she happy? Not for a minute. She hadn't been happy since marrying at the age of 19 and going to live in her husband's house. Gods, my gods, what did this woman want? What did the woman want, whose eyes always burned with an incomprehensible fire, this witch with a slight squint in one eye, who'd adorned herself with mimosa in springtime? What did she want? I do not know. I have no idea. Evidently, she spoke the truth when she said that it was the master that she needed, and not the Gothic-style house, the private garden, or the money. She loved him. She was telling the truth. Margarita walked so girl bosses can run. Even I, the truthful narrator, but a detached observer nonetheless, feel my heart contract when I think of what Margarita went through the next day when she came to the master's house and found that he was no longer there. Fortunately, she had not yet had to talk with her husband, who had not come home when he was supposed to. She did everything that she could to find out what had happened to the master, and of course had no success whatsoever. She then went back to her house and resumed her former life. But as soon as the dirty snow disappeared from the sidewalks and pavements, as soon as the damp, restless wind and spring tugged at the Fortochka, Margarita Nikolaevna began to feel even more miserable. than she had during the winter. She often cried in secret, long and bitter tears. She didn't know whether the man she loved was alive or dead, and as the despairing days passed, the thought came to her more and more, especially at twilight, that she was tied to a dead man. She should either forget him in she should either forget him or die herself. It was really impossible to go on with the life that she was living. Impossible. Forget him, no matter what the costs. Forget him. But he could not be forgotten. That was the trouble. Yes, 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 I made the very same mistake, Margarita would say as she sat by the stove and stared at the fire which had been lit in memory of the fire that burned when he was writing Pontius Pilate. Why did I leave him that night? Why? I must have been crazy. I come back next day just as I say I would, but it was already too late. Yes, like poor Levi Matvey. I came back way too late. All of this was absurd, of course, since how would her staying with the master that night have made things any different? Could she really have saved him? Nonsense, we would have exclaimed, but not in front of a woman who has been driven to despair. Margarita Nikolaevna lived in this kind of torment throughout the winter and into the spring. On the same day when there was all the commotion caused by the black magician's appearance in Moscow on Friday, when Verlois's uncle was sent packing back to Kiev, when the bookkeeper was arrested, and when many other grotesque and baffling things took place, Margarita woke up around noontime in her bedroom, which had a bay window looking out over the tower of her house. Upon awakening, Margarita did not burst into tears as she often did, because she woke with a premonition that on that day something was finally going to happen. Once she sensed this premonition, she nurtured it, wanting to take root in her soul and fearing that it would leave her. I believe, Margarita whispered solemnly, I believe something is going to happen. It can't help but happened, because why, in fact, have I been made to suffer for my life? I admit that I have cheated, and I've lied and lived a secret life hidden from everyone. But even that doesn't deserve such cruel punishment. Something is bound to happen, because nothing lasts forever. And besides, the dream that I had was prophetic. I swear that it was. This is what Margarita Nikolaevna whispered to herself as she gazed at the crimson shades suffused with sunlight, nervously got dressed and combed her short curly hair before the triple mirror of her vanity table. Margarita's dream that night had truly been unusual. The fact was that she had not dreamed about the master during the whole agonizing winter. At night he would leave her, and it was only during the daytime that she suffered. But now she had dreamed about him. Margarita had dreamed about an unfamiliar locale, a bleak and dismal place under an overcast early spring sky. Beneath a cover of patchy clouds there was a flock of noiseless rooks. A rough bridge crossed a turrid, swollen stream, dismal, scrubby, half-bare trees, a lone aspen, and beyond that, amidst trees and past vegetable gardens, was a log hut that could have been an outside kitchen, a bathhouse, or the devil knows what. The whole setting was so dead and dismal that it made you want to hang yourself on an aspen by the bridge. Not a breath of wind, not a cloud moving, not a living soul, a hellish place for the living. For a living being. And then, imagine, the door of the log hut opened, and there he was, quite far away, but clearly visible. He looked tattered, and you could tell that what he was wearing. You couldn't tell what he was wearing. His hair was disheveled. He was unshaven. His eyes looked pained and anxious. He was beckoning to her with his hand, calling to her, choking in the dead air. Margarita started running to him over the furrowed grounds, and then she woke up. The dream can mean only one thing, one of two things. Margarita Nikolaevna. I was starting to say Nikolaevich. Nikolaevna reflected. If he's dead and was beckoning me, that means that he's come for me and I shall die soon. That's very good, because my suffering will then end. Or, if he is alive and in the dream can only mean that he is reminding me of his existence, he wants to tell me that we'll see each other again. Yes, we'll see each other very soon. Still excited, Margarita got dressed and tried to convince herself that, in essence, everything was turning out well, and that one had to know how to seize such opportunities and to take advantage of them. Her husband had gone away on a business trip for 3 whole days, and she had 3 whole days to herself, and nobody could stop her from thinking and daydreaming about whatever she pleased. She had the whole apartment to herself, 5 rooms on the upper floor of a private house that would be the envy of 1,000 Muscovites. However, despite having the run of the house for 3 whole days, Margarita chose far from the best spot in the luxurious apartment. After drinking some tea, she went off to the dark, windowless room where the luggage was kept, and where there were 2 large bureaus filled with various old odds and ends. She squatted down in front of the first bureau and opened the bottom drawer. From beneath a pile of silk scraps, she took out the one possession that she valued most in life, an old brown leather album which contained a photograph of the master, a savings book with 10,000 deposited in his name, dried rose petals pressed into tissue paper, and part of a typewritten manuscript that was singed at the bottom. Returning to her bedroom with these treasures, Margarita Nikolaevna set the picture against her triple mirror and sat in front of it for an hour or so, holding the fire-damaged manuscript on her knees as she leafed through and reread what, after the fire, had neither the beginning nor an end. The darkness that had come from the Mediterranean covered the city so detested by the procurator. The hanging bridges which connected the temple with the fearsome Antonia Tower had disappeared, and the abyss descended from the sky, covering the winged gods above, the hyperdrome, the Hasmonean palace and its embrasures, the bazaars and caravanseries, alley and pools. Yarshalaim, the great city, vanished as if it had never existed. Margarita wanted to read more, but there was nothing more except the charred and tattered fringe. Wiping her tears away, Margarita Nikolaevna put down the manuscript and leaned her elbows on the vanity table. She sat there in front of the mirror for a long time and not taking her eyes off the master's picture. Then her tears dried. Margarita put all of the things together neatly, and the minutes later they were back in their hiding places beneath the silk rags, and the lock on the door to the dark room locked shut. Margarita Nikolaevna was putting her coat on in front of a hall, getting ready to go out for a walk. The beautiful Natasha, her maid, asked her what she wanted for dinner, and when she said she didn't care for amusement, Natasha began a casual conversation with her mistress and started relating God knows what, something about a magician at the theater yesterday who had performed astounding tricks, handing out free bottles of imported perfumes and stockings, and then how, after the show, when everyone was out on the streets, abracadabra, they were all naked. Margarita Nikolaevna collapsed on the chair beneath the hall mirror and burst out laughing. "Natasha, shame on you!" said Margarita. "A girl like you knows how to read. People in lines make up the devil knows what, and here you go repeating it." Natasha blushed a deep red and protested heatedly that nothing was made up, and that she herself had been in a food store on the Arbat today and had seen a woman come in wearing shoes. But when she went to pay the cashier, her shoes disappeared off of her feet, and she was left standing in her stockings. Her eyes popped. There was a hole in her heel, and the shoes were the magic ones that she had gotten at the show. "And she just left like that? Just like that?" cried Natasha, blushing even deeper because she wasn't being believed. "And last night, Margarita Nikolaevna, the police picked up about 100 people. Women who had been at the show were running down Tverskaya in nothing but their drawers." Well, naturally, you've got all of these from Darya, said Margarita Nikolaevna. I've known for a long time that she is a terrible liar. Gotta make that cake pop. It is, as we have learned, the ultimate power. Well, naturally, I've known for a long time that she is a terrible liar. The amusing conversation ended. And a pleasant surprise for Natasha. Margarita Nikolaevna went into her bedroom and came out with a pair of stockings and a bottle of cologne, saying that she wanted to do a trick too. She gave them to Natasha and asked only one thing in return, that she not run down Sverkaya in just her stockings, and that she not listen to Darya. Mistress and maid then kissed and parted. Settling back against the soft, comfortable seat of the trolleybus, Margarita rode along the Arbat, thinking about her own affairs and eavesdropping on her hushed conversations of the two men sitting in front of her. They were whimpering some sort of gibberish to each other, turning around now and then in fear of being overheard. The robust, beefy fellow with sharp, pig-like eyes sitting by the window was softly telling the little man next to him that they had to cover the coffin with a black cloth. Impossible, the little one whispered in astonishment. That's preposterous. So, what did Zeldibin do? Along with the steady drone of the bus, the words came from the window. Criminal investigation, scandal, complete bafflement. Margarita Nikolaevna managed to make some sense of the disconnected bits of the conversation. They were whispering about how the head of some corpse, whose they didn't say, had been stolen from a coffin that very morning. And that was why the man named Zeldibin was in such a state. The two men were whispering also seemed to have some connection with the vandalized corpse. Will we have time to buy flowers? Worried the little one. Didn't you say that the cremation was at 2? In the end, Margarita Nikolaevna got fed up listening to the mysterious prattle about a stolen head, and she was glad when it was time for her to get off. How exciting. Hey, look! The point thing did work. At least Polly got the points. I don't know why. Hey, Boo Boo Glee. What's up? They seem to be working again. Boo Boo Glee joins as a giant dinosaur. How exciting must your life be when you're hearing these guys on a bus talk about somebody's stolen head and you're like, I don't want to hear about this anymore. This is boring. Minutes later, Margarita Nikolaevna was... Can we have Margarita meet Empress Teresa? Fish supremacy. David, what's up? How's it going? Minutes later, Margarita Nikolaevna was sitting on one of the benches beneath the Kremlin wall, having positioned herself so that she had a view of the menage. Margarita squinted in the bright sunlight, recalled her dream of the previous night, and recalled what exactly 1 year before, on the same day, at the same time, that she had been sitting here with him at the same bench, and her black bag was lying beside her on the bench, just as it had been. Although he wasn't with her now, Margarita Nikolaevna was talking to him in her thoughts. If you've been exiled, why haven't you let me know? People do manage to let others know. Have you fallen out of love with me? No. Somehow, I can't believe that. That means that you are exiled and died. Then I beg you, release me. Give me freedom to live and breathe. Margarita Nikolaevna answered to him. You are free. Am I stopping you? Then she protested. What kind of answer is that? No. Make me forget you, and then I'll be free. People walked past Margarita Nikolaevna. A man gave the well-dressed woman a side glance, attracted by her beauty and the fact that she was alone. He coughed and sat down at the end of the bench where Margarita Nikolaevna was sitting and gathering up his courage, said, "Decidedly beautiful weather today." And Margarita gave him such a glowering look that he got up and left. "That's what I mean," said Margarita in her head to the man who possessed her. "Why, really, did I chase that man away? I'm bored, and there was nothing wrong with that Lovelace except, perhaps, for he's stupid, decidedly. Why am I sitting here alone beneath a wall like an owl? Why am I cut off from life?" She became totally sad and depressed, and suddenly that morning's wave of expectation and excitement hit her in the chest. "Yes, something is going to happen!" The wave hit her again, and then she realized that it was a wave of sound. The beating of drums and the blaring of trumpets, slightly off key, could be heard with an ever-increasing clarity through the din of the city. Leading the procession that was passing the park railing was a mounted policeman, followed by 3 men on foot. Next came the musicians on the slow-moving truck. After that, a brand new open hearse carrying a wreath-covered coffin and 4 people, 3 men and a woman, each of whom was standing on the corner of a platform. Even from the distance, Margarita could tell that the faces of those standing in the hearse accompanying the deceased on his last journey looked strangely perplexed. This was especially true of the woman standing on the left rear corner of the vehicle. Her plump cheeks seemed to be bursting with some kind of juicy secret, and there was an unambiguous sparkle on her puffy little eyes. It seemed as if she couldn't contain herself and was about to wink at the deceased and say, "Have you ever seen anything like it? A real mystery." Similarly perplexed faces could be seen on the 300 or so mourners walking slowly behind the hearse. Margarita watched the procession as it proceeded, listening to the fading sounds of the mournful bass drum and beating out its ever-constant boom, boom, boom. "What an odd funeral," she thought, "and how depressing that the boom is. Oh, really, I'd sell my soul to the devil if I could only find out if he was still alive or not. Who, I wonder, are those amazing-looking people burying?" "Mikhail Alexandrovich Berlois." Ah, said the somewhat nasal, I think it's "Mikhail Alexandrovich Berlois," said the somewhat nasal masculine voice beside her. "The chairman, a Masalit." It's okay, Boogali. It's Boobily. We do a recap every week to more or less know what's going on. But I feel like this is one that you can sort of jump in on because there are so many different characters. It's almost like a collection of vaguely connected people because they're all in the same town. And the devil is there in his various forms. Surprised, Margarita Nikolaevna turned and saw a man at the other end of the bench, who must have sat down noisily when she was preoccupied with the procession, and presumably had asked her last question out loud without knowing it. Meanwhile, the procession had come to a halt, probably because of the traffic lights up ahead. "Yeah," the stranger continued, "their mood is amazing. They're taking someone to be buried, and all they can think about is what happened to his head." Oh, good. Glad that your hip is doing better. "What head?" asked Margarita, peering at her unexpected neighbor, who turned out to be a short man with fiery red hair and a fang, who was wearing a starched shirt, a fine striped suit, patent leather shoes, and a bowler hat. His tie was flashy, but the most astonishing thing of all was that sticking out of his breast pocket, where most men carry a handkerchief or a pen, there was a well-gnawed chicken bone. "Well, you see, this morning at Griboyedov, the dead man's head was removed from his coffin." "But how can that be?" "The devil knows how," replied the redhead casually. "But, if you ask me, it might be worth asking Behemoth about that. A terribly clever theft it was, too. Caused an unbelievable scandal. And what's more, no one knows who would need that head and why." That's being saved for later. That's fair. That's a fair difference. Don't want to step on the devil's shoes by claiming to be the devil. However, however preoccupied Margarita Nikolaevna was with her own concern, she was nonetheless struck by the stranger's bizarre chatter. But Chekhov's chicken bone. But wait a minute. Which Berlois? Was it the one in today's paper who... Precisely so. Precisely so. So, does that mean that the mourners are writers? Yeah, naturally. And do you know who they are by sight? Every last one. Tell me, is the critic Lutansky among them by any rate? How could he not be? There he is over there, fourth row from the end. The blonde one? Ash blonde. See, he's got his eyes raised up to the heavens. The one who looks like a Catholic priest? That's him, studying Latunsky. Margarita asked no more questions. You see, and you, I can see, hate this Latunsky. I also hate a few others, answered Margarita through her teeth, but it's not worth talking about. By now, the procession had moved on. The line of mostly empty cars stretched out behind the marchers. If you say so, Margarita Nikolaevna. Margarita was astounded. Do you know me? In place of an answer, the redhead swept the bowler off of his head and held it in his outstretched hand. Looks like a real thug, thought Margarita, examining her sidewalk interlocutor. But I don't know you. But I don't know you, Margarita said dryly. How could you know me? But I've been sent to see you regarding a certain small matter. Margarita turned pale and recoiled. You should have said that right away, instead of spouting devil knows what about the severed head. Have you come to arrest me? Not at all. What is this? As soon as you start talking about they think that you're going to arrest them, I simply have some business to discuss with you. I don't understand at all. What business? The redhead looked around and said mysteriously, I've been sent to give you an invitation for this evening. Are you raving? An invitation from whom? A certain distinguished foreigner. Margarita got furious. A new breed has appeared, street pimps. That's the thanks that I get for taking on assignments like this, exclaimed the redhead, taking offense, and as Margarita turned to leave, he growled at her. Fool! Scoundrel! She retorted, and she turned. She heard the redhead's voice behind her. The darkness that had come from the Mediterranean covered the street so detested by the procurator, the hanging bridge which connected to the temple of the fearsome, and Antonio Tower had disappeared. Jerusalem, the great city, vanished as if it had never existed. And you can vanish too, along with your charred manuscript and your dried rose. Sit here on the bench alone and beg him to set you free so that you can breathe and be allowed to forget him. Margarita's face blanched, and she turned back to the bench. The redhead looked at her with tightly narrowed eyes. I don't understand any of this, Margarita Nikolaevna said softly. You could have found out about the burnt pages, broken into my house and spied on me. Did you pay off Natasha? Is that it? But how could you know my thoughts? She wrinkled her brow, looking agonized, and added, Tell me, who are you? What department are you from? And what a bore this is, grumbled the redhead, and said louder, Excuse me, but I already told you that I'm not from any department. Please, sit down. Margarita obeyed without a fuss, but as she sat down, she asked again, Who are you? Well, if you must know, my name is Azazel. Azazilo. But that won't mean anything to you anyway. But won't you tell me how you knew about those pages and about my thoughts? No, I won't. But do you know anything about him? Well, let's say I do. I beg you, just tell me one thing. Is he alive? Don't torment me. Yeah, he's alive. He's alive. My God, please. Don't. No fits and no screams. She really said, "What are you, a cop?" Yeah, I mean, don't that make her look a little bit sussy? She knows she's doing something she shouldn't be doing. I, I'm sorry, forgive me, mumbled the now compliant Margarita. It's true, I got angry at you. You will admit, though, that when someone on the street invites a woman to go somewhere, I'm not prejudiced, I assure you. But I never see any foreigners, and I have no desire to socialize with them. And besides, my husband, my tragedy is that I live with someone I don't love. But it would be ignoble of me to ruin his life. He's never shown me anything but kindness. Azelzo listened to her disconnected speech with obvious boredom and said sternly, "Please be quiet for just a minute." Margarita fell into submissive silence. "My invitation is from a foreigner who is perfectly safe, and not a soul will know about your visit. I can promise you that." "But what does he need me for?" "You'll find out later." "I see. I'm supposed to sleep with him," said Margarita reflectively. Azazelo. Sorry, I'm imagining it in my head how you typed it out. That's how I do it. Zazalo gave a haughty smirk and replied, "That would, I can assure you, be answer to any woman's dreams." A chuckle distorted Azazalo's face. "But I must..." You're good. You don't need to record yourself. Because it's me trying to retrain myself in saying at least some way as I go. But I try not to slow the reading down by sounding out every name. That doesn't come immediately. "But I must disappoint you. That won't happen." "But who is this foreigner?" Margarita cried out loudly in exasperation, causing passers-by to turn their heads. "And why should I have any interest in seeing him?" Azazalo leaned over to her and whispered in a gravely significant way, "A great interest indeed. You'll have the opportunity. You'll have the opportunity to do what?" exclaimed Margarita, her eyes widening. "Am I right? Are you suggesting that I can get news of him there?" Azazalo nodded silently. "Then I'll go," Margarita exclaimed with vigor, seizing Azazalo by the arm. "I'll go anywhere that you want." Heaving a sigh of relief, Azazalo leaned back against the bench, which had the name Nura carved in large letters on it, and observed ironically, "A troublesome race, these women." He buried his hands in his pockets and stretched his legs in front of him. "Why did they send me on this job? Behemoth should have gone. He's the one with the charm." With a bitterly sad smile, Margarita said, "Stop trying to mystify and torment me with your riddles. I am an unhappy person, and you're taking advantage of that. I may be getting involved in something strange, but if I am, I swear it's only because you lured me here with the talk of him. My head is spinning from all of these things that I don't understand." "No scene." "No scenes, no scenes," retorted Azazalo with a grimace. You should put yourself in my position, smacking some bureaucrat in the puss, booting out some old geezer, shooting someone or something along those lines. That's a real specialty. But talking with a woman in love, no thanks. I've been talking to you into this for a half an hour now. So will you go?" "I'll go." "Then be so kind as to take this," said Azazalo, who pulled a round gold jar out from his pocket and handed it to Margarita, saying, "Hide it, or people will see it. It'll do some good. It'll do you some good, Margarita Nikolaevna. Your grief has really aged you in the past 6 months. Margarita flared up, but said nothing. And Azazelo continued. Tonight, at exactly 9:30, be so kind as to take off your clothes and spread this ointment all over your face and your whole body. Then, you can do as you like, but don't leave the phone. I'll call you at 10 and tell you everything that you need to know. You don't have to worry about anything. You'll be taken to where you have to go, and you won't be caused any upset. Understand? After a short silence, Margarita replied, Understood. This thing is pure gold. I can tell by the weight. Well, what of it? I know perfectly well that I am being bribed and lured into some shady business for which I'll have to pay a high price. What is this? Are you starting in again? No, wait. Give me back the cream. Margarita clutched the jar tighter and continued. No, wait. I know what I'm getting myself in for, but I'll do anything for his sake. Because there is no hope left for me in this world, but if you destroy me, you'll be sorry. Yes, you will, because I'll be dying for love and pounding her chest. Margarita gazed at the sun. Give it back, Azazelo yelled angrily. Give it back and to hell with everything. Let them send Behemoth. Oh no! Exclaimed Margarita to the astonishment of passers-by. I agree to everything. I agree to play out this whole comedy out with the cream. I agree to go to the devil and back. I won't give it back. Ah! Azazelo howled suddenly, his eyes bulging. He began pointing at something over toward the park railing. Margarita turned to where Azazelo was pointing, but didn't notice anything in particular. Then she turned back to him, expecting an explanation for that absurd bah, but there was no one there to provide it. Margarita Nikolaevna's mysterious interlocutor had vanished. Margarita quickly thrust her hands into her bag where, prior to Azazelo's howl, that she had hidden the jar and assured herself that it was still there. Then, without further reflection, she ran hurriedly out of Alexandrovsky Park. It's a great interaction. Azazelo cream. This chapter is XX. One more X followed by Azazelo cream. I mean... The full moon hung in the clear evening sky, visible through the branches of the maple tree. The linden and acacias traced an intricate pattern of spots on the garden floor. The triple casement bay windows, wide open, but the blinds drawn, shone with a harsh electric light. The lights of Margarita Nikolaevna's bedroom were all turned on, revealing a state of total chaos. Chemise, stocking, and underwear were laying on a blanket on top of the bed, and other undergarments were strewn on the floor, along with a pack of cigarettes that had gotten crushed in the excitement. There were slippers on the night table, next to the unfinished cup of coffee and an ashtray that held smoking cigarette butts. A black evening gown hung on the back of a chair. The room smelled of perfume, and from somewhere came the smell of a red-hot iron. Margarita Nikolaevna was sitting before her mirror in the bathrobe, which had been thrown over their naked body, and black suede shoes. In front of her lay a gold watch, and next to it a small jar. You okay, Bubs? You need some help? And just scooting slightly. There were slippers on the night table next to the unfinished cup of coffee and an ashtray that held smoking cigarette butts. A black evening gown hung on the back of a chair. The room smelled of perfume, and somewhere came the smell of a red-hot iron. Margarita Nikolaevna was sitting before her mirror in her bathrobe, which had been thrown over a naked body, the black suede shoes. In front of her lay a golden watch, and next to it small jar that she had received from from Azazello. Margarita's eyes were glued to the watch. At times it seemed to her as if the watch were broken and the hands weren't moving, but they were moving, albeit very slowly, as if they had kept getting stuck, and finally the big hand hit 29 minutes after 9. Margarita's heart gave such a terrible thump that at first she couldn't even pick up the jar. Then she pulled herself together and opened the jar. She saw that it contained a greasy yellowish cream which seemed to smell of swamp mud. With the tip of her fingers, Margarita scooped up the small glob of the cream and put it on her palms, which made the swampy woodland smell more noticeable. She then began rubbing the cream into her cheeks and forehead. The cream spread easily and seemed to be absorbed immediately. After several applications of the cream, Margarita looked in the mirror and dropped the jar on the face of her watch, cracking the crystal. She closed her eyes, took another look, and burst into wild laughter. Her eyebrows, which had been plucked thread thin at the ends, had thickened and now arched evenly over her eyes, which had become green. There was no longer any trace of the tiny vertical lines of the bridge of her nose, which had first appeared back in October when the master disappeared. Gone, too, were the yellowish shadows around her temples and the barely noticeable crow's feet at the outer corners of her eyes. Her cheeks were suffused with rosy blush from her forehead had become clear and white, and her hair salon permanent wave had loosened. There in the mirror, staring back at 30-year-old Margarita, was 20-year-old woman with naturally curly black hair, showing her teeth and laughing unrestrainably. Having laughed her fill, Margarita swept off her robe, scooped up a generous glob of the lightly greased cream, and began rubbing it vigorously all over her body, which immediately became rosy and began to glow. Then the throbbing in her temple, which had been bothering her all evening ever since having met with Azazello in Alexandrovsky Park, disappeared in a flash, as if the needle had been removed from her brain. The muscles in her arms and legs got stronger, and then Margarita's body became weightless. She gave a little jump and stayed suspended in the air, just above the carpet, and then she felt a slow downward pull and was back on the ground. "Oh, what a cream! What a cream!" cried Margarita, throwing herself into an armchair. The cream had transformed her, then her appearance. Now her whole body, every part of it, surged with joy, and she felt as if tiny bubbles were prickling all over her body. Margarita felt free of everything. In addition, she realized with utter clarity that her premonition of the morning had come true, and she was leaving her house and her former life forever. But one thought from her former life persisted, namely, that there was one last thing that she had to do before embarking on this new and extraordinary something that was pulling her upward into the air. So, naked as she was, flying intermittently, she ran out of the bedroom into her husband's study, turned on the lights, and rushed to the desk. On a sheet of paper, torn off a pad, she wrote in pencil, quickly and boldly, without any correction, the following note: "Forgive me and forget me as quickly as you can. I am leaving forever. Don't try to find me. It's useless. I've become a witch because of the grief and the misfortune that have befallen me. It is time for me to go. Farewell." How can you get this skincare? Well, you mean wearing the devil? I think all you have to do is like summon the devil. You doing okay? Her soul relieved of every care, Margarita flew back into the bedroom, and Natasha ran in after her. I think you're the a-hole from cheating on your husband instead of breaking it off. You should have left your husband a long time ago, so you didn't, use him. Her soul relieved of every care, Margarita flew back into her bedroom, and Natasha ran in after her, loaded down with all sorts of things, and suddenly everything, a dress on the A dress on a wooden hanger, lace shawls, dark blue silk shoes on shoe trees, and a belt fell to the floor, and Natasha clasped her now free hand. "Well, do I look good?" cried Margarita loudly in a husky voice. Infidelity happens in a lot of books, okay? Inugami Curse. The entire thing in Inugami Curse with the Inugami family was from infidelity. Which then turned into, you can have a relationship with this guy who will give you children because I cannot give you children, will not give you children, and it will look shameful to you, and divorce will look shameful to you. It's just like, it's everywhere. "How did this happen?" whispered Natasha, reeling backward. "How did you do it, Margarita Nikolaevna?" Oh my gosh, I just finished The Devil in the Dark Water, and that also had a wife who was married to Governor Uncle. And Governor Uncle had a mistress, and the wife knew of the mistress, but the wife didn't want to sleep with Governor Uncle / her husband. So he was allowed to have a mistress. It's just like, you'll hear more about that next week. "How did you do it, Margarita Nikolaevna?" "It's the cream, the cream, the cream," replied Margarita, pointing to the gleaming gold jar and doing a turn in front of the mirror. Forgetting about the crumpled dress on the floor, Natasha ran over to the mirror and stared with voracious, burning eyes at what was left of the cream. Her lips whispered something. She turned again to Margarita and said with some kind of reverence, "What skin? What skin? Why, Margarita Nikolaevna, your skin is glowing." Like, literally glowing. I think you might be radioactive. But then she remembered herself, ran over and picked up the dress and began smoothing it out. Put it down, Margarita shouted at her. "The devil with it. Throw everything out, or rather, keep it as a memento to remember me by. You can take everything in the room." Natasha stood for a while, as if in a daze, staring at Margarita. Then she fell on her neck, kissing her and shouting, "Like satin, it glows like satin. And your eyebrows, what eyebrows! Take all of the stuff and the perfume too, and put it all on your trunk and hide it," shouted Margarita. "But don't take the jewelry, or they'll accuse you of stealing." Natasha put whatever came to hand into the bundle, dresses, shoes, stockings, and underwear, and ran out to the bedroom. Just then, the sound of a virtuoso waltz came blaring through the open window across the street, and the car was heard sputtering as it pulled to the gates. "Zazzalo, we'll call any minute," exclaimed Margarita, listening to the waltz screaming in from outside. "Yes, we will, and the foreigner is harmless. Yes, I can see that now. He is harmless." The car roared and pulled away from the gates. The gate banged, and steps were heard coming from the path. "It's Nikolai Ivanovich. I can tell by his steps," thought Margarita. "I'll have to do something interesting and amusing as a way of saying goodbye." Margarita pulled the shade aside and sat sideways on the windowsill, her hands clasped on her knees. The moonlight caressed her right side. Margarita raised her head toward the moon and assumed a pensive and poetic expression. Footsteps were heard once and twice again, and then they suddenly stopped. After admiring the moon a little longer, Margarita sighed for the sake of appearances and turned to look out on the dark garden at where she did, in fact, see Nikolai Ivanovich, who lived on the floor below her. Bathed in moonlight, he was sitting on a bench, and it was obvious that he had sat down suddenly. His pinez was askew, and he was clutching his briefcase to his chest. "Well, hello, Nikolai Ivanovich," said Margarita in a sad voice. "Good evening. Have you come from a meeting?" Nikolai Ivanovich made no reply. "I, as you can see, have been sitting here alone, bored, looking at the moon, listening to the waltz." Margarita passed her left hand across her forehead, adjusting a stray curl, and then said angrily, "That's not polite, Nikolai Ivanovich. I am a lady, after all. It's rude not to answer when someone's talking to you." Nikolai Ivanovich, visible in the moonlight, down to the last button on his gray waistcoat, the last hair on his blonde goatee, suddenly grinned a wild grin, got up from his bench, and obviously, besides himself with embarrassment, did not remove his hat, as one would have expected, but rather waved his briefcase to the side and got into a crouching position, as if he were about to do a Russian dance. "Oh, what a bore you are, Nikolai Ivanovich," continued Margarita. I can't tell how sick and tired I am of all of you, and how happy I am to be leaving you. To the devil's mother with all of you." Just then, Margarita heard the phone ring in the bedroom behind her. She jumped off the windowsill and, forgetting about Nikolai Ivanovich, grabbed the receiver. "It's Azazelo," the boy said in her ear. Dear Azazelo," exclaimed Margarita. "It's time to fly away," said Azazelo, and it was clear from his tone that he was pleased with Margarita's genuine display of joy. "When you fly over the gates, shout 'I'm invisible,' and then fly over the city for a while to get used to it, and after that, head south, away from the city, and go straight to the river. They're expecting you." Margarita hung up the phone, at which point something wooden-soundingly started bumping around the next room and began knocking on the door. Margarita opened the door, and in flew a dancing broom, brush end up. It tapped a few beats on the floor with its handle, gave a kick, and strained toward the window. Margarita squealed with delight and jumped astride the broomstick. Only then did she remember that in all her confusion she had forgotten to get dressed. She galloped over the bed and grabbed the first thing that she saw, a light blue chemise. Waving like a banner, she flew out the window at the sound of the waltz over the garden intensified. Margarita slipped down from the window and saw Nikolai Ivanovich on the bench. He seemed to be frozen to it, and was listening in a stupefied state to the banging and shouting coming from the lighted bedroom and his upstairs neighbor. "Farewell, Nikolai Ivanovich," cried Margarita, dancing about in front of him. He groaned and began edging down the bench, feeling his way with his hand and knocking his briefcase to the ground. "Goodbye forever. I'm flying away," shouted Margarita, drowning out the waltz. She then decided that she had no need for the chemise, and with an ominous chuckle she threw it over Nikolai Ivanovich's head. Blinded, he tumbled off the bench and onto the bricks of the path. Margarita turned to take one last look at the house where she had suffered for so long, and in the lighted window she saw Natasha gaping with astonishment. "Farewell, Natasha!" Margarita shouted and urged her broom forward. "Invisible! I am invisible!" she shouted even more loudly, and with the branches of a maple tree brushing against her face, she flew out over the gates and onto the street, and the totally crazed waltz followed her aloft. You know everybody's got a broom in their house, though. The broom would just happen. Light. Okay, we'll return with Flight next week, because now seems like a good time. I do have to... Yeah. Right now, our name is Margarita. We are a witch. Oh, yeah, it does. Oh, it does. Okay, so we can... Nikolai Ivanovich was not in this at all. He just chilling. Hmm. This is why I say. Read people's stories, people's preferences to get to know them for sure. Also because you start to see. Actually, we were miserable, I should say. Actually, we went to the park super miserable, wanting our long lost love, run into a devil man who didn't like talking to us. Hashtag too much female misery. He gives us golden skincare that turned us into witch. Also super hot. Hashtag youth. There is more apartment bureaucracy stuff. I figured that we're gonna come back. I'm just trying to give us stuff for like covering what we went through. I mean, I will leave all of this other stuff down here with the Nutty Theater. Hashtag skincare is WinCare. Turns out all that magic money breaks in real life. Also, the clothes, I should say fraud alert, break in real life. Hashtag nude Russians on the loose. Berloise's uncle couldn't get his apartment because shenanigans. Hashtag return to Kiev. And Berlois lost his head before his funeral. Hashtag demons steal heads. Lost my mind twice. Berlois is having a tough time. Okay, he's had a. This is what you get when you reject the existence of Jesus. That is the moral of the story. Make Jesus your homie. Maybe you won't lose your head. Or maybe you want to become friends with a couple of demons, devils, it's fine. Maybe you want to talk to Behemoth. Is he in purgatory now? He could be. Okay, I think that's good for us remembering for next week. Like I said, these are just to help us remember what we read last week. So thank you everybody for hanging out. Oh, I didn't even realize that Tate had disappeared. He just moved slightly. So he's just right there. But thank you everybody for hanging out. I hope you have a good weekend. And don't oh what Vanya, what sort of horror have I forgotten? If I haven't forgotten anything, then I will see you on the Discord. Anyway. Okay, you just said, oh. Good night. And don't die.